what is Tai Chi. Something that is ancient, it's complex, it is shifting, and also, most importantly, it is based upon the practitioner or the student's relationship to Tai Chi itself. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you really about what is Tai Chi. It's a question that comes up pretty often. There's still quite a lot of confusion around what it is. So that is what this video is about. And I suppose for me, when I set out to start taking this video, I began writing a little bit of a script. And I thought to myself, this is actually going to be quite easy. This is going to be quite a simple answer, and it'll be over and done with within a couple of minutes, and clarity restored, and people are going to know what they're going to get into. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought about really the underpinnings of Tai Chi and the, let's say, the classical Chinese philosophy or Chinese thought that underpins the whole body of knowledge, which is Tai Chi Chuan. And I then basically had no other choice than to throw out the script and really go back to some of these roots of Chinese philosophy. And one of those is about spontaneity, is around simply engaging in an activity for the moment and being fully in the moment to see what then emerged out of that moment. So I understand that might not help you initially. So let's rewind to the common definitions of Tai Chi Chuan, and what people mostly read or hear or see on YouTube. Now, the first one of those is that Tai Chi is an exercise, and it's an exercise that is practiced slowly and synchronized with the breathing, and that this exercise is good for body and mind, and there you go. The other side, which is, I suppose, the flip side, is that it can also be a martial art. So some people like to describe Tai Chi as being either an exercise or a martial art. But I suppose the truth is that it is both and can be both. And it really depends on how you want to approach Tai Chi. So that's kind of the simple answer to Tai Chi. However, in my experience, what I tend to find is that people who are coming to Tai Chi simply as an exercise don't tend to last that long. And the reason is that Tai Chi is actually highly complex, and it takes a long time to both learn the basics and then even longer to master Tai Chi. So in that sense, it isn't really just an exercise. It is not like going down to the gym and learning a few exercises that you can do to build strength or build cardio or something like that. And it is also vastly different to both yoga and Pilates. So they can't even be taken as comparisons to Tai Chi. So that makes it rather difficult to explain what Tai Chi is. So I'm now going to kind of do my best to describe something that is ancient, it's complex, it is shifting, and also, most importantly, it is based upon the practitioner or the student's relationship to Tai Chi itself. So I think this is kind of like representing the typical Chinese philosophy, really. So let's go back to the history of Tai Chi, and particularly Chen style Tai Chi, to give it a little bit of context so you understand more about where it's coming from, its origins, and particularly why it emerged at the time that it did. And I think that begins to describe much more about what it is, what it aims to achieve, and I suppose part of the journey through Tai Chi. Now, Chen style is understood and widely recognized to have come about in the late 1500s and the early 1600s. And it was created by a man who had been traveling around China at war. So he was a general, and he had been around China for a good number of years and had gained a huge amount of military experience. But not only that, this man was a real thinker as well. So he thought a lot about what was going on and about his experiences. So when he finally returned home, he actually set about putting together a practice, and we can call this an art if you like, but I'm going to call it more generally a practice. And yes, it is artistic in the sense that it has an innate emergence to it and an innate creativity to it that often I don't think is recognised quite as much as perhaps it should be. But he set about this from a philosophical perspective, from a medicinal perspective, and from a martial perspective. And there are a number of reasons why he did this. Now, the philosophical aspect, which is kind of interwoven still to this day in terms of Chinese culture, is a blend of a number of thinkers that really existed around, let's say, loosely, 500 to 250 BC, give or take a few hundred years either way, plus some others further down the road, okay? I'm not going to get into the details here around Chinese philosophy because there is such a huge amount of stuff in there. But some of it might go back to, 1500 BC or something like that. But let's not get into dates at the moment because we know that there is this body of knowledge that was constructed around about that time and basically crystallized around that time to become integrated into Chinese, sort of like the Chinese culture and the Chinese way of being within the world. And what distinguishes Chinese philosophy from, let's say, Western-based philosophy is that Chinese philosophy is around finding our way in the world. So it's navigating the complexities, the messiness, and all of that sort of stuff that is the world around us and being within it. And doing it successfully, I suppose, is one of those, is the best way of describing that. Okay? Now, Western philosophy is around finding the truth. And so it can be a much more intellectual and intellectual process that is much more inwardly focused into the mind, which is much more around thought. Whereas Chinese philosophy is much more around acting within the world. So in that sense, what we're really looking at is we're looking at a martial art that fundamentally helps the practitioner to be more successful in the world and to be able to navigate it better, to be able to go through their experiences in a more effective way, shall we say. And those philosophies that are mixed together in all of that are a blend of Taoism, Confucianism, and all of the other kinds of thinkers that there might be. And within those, there are certain principles that have been lifted out and that are emphasized within Tai Chi practice itself in order to help a practitioner to really learn the form and to learn Tai Chi. So that's one element. The second element is the medicinal approach. Now, in Chinese medicine, the body and health are viewed fundamentally differently again to Western medicine. So within Chinese medicine, we're really looking at the flow of qi through the body. And that is how the qi is flowing through the various organs of the body and the meridians of the body. So in Chinese medicine, this qi flows through various meridians that go through, and it has a massive complex network throughout the body, which then distributes this in order to basically support life itself. And so Tai Chi and the movements within Tai Chi and the way in which we look to express those movements and complete those movements are based upon the fundamental ideas in Chinese medicine. And those are that once we gain correct alignment and other principles such as being relaxed and fluid in our movement, the qi follows. And so what that naturally does is that leads to strength, it leads to vitality, it leads to long-term health, and of course it leads to longevity. And in that way, Tai Chi is developed and designed to nourish the body and nourish the mind and to nourish the spirit at the same time as learning a martial art. So from the martial perspective, you can only assume that this man who went round China had come across lots and lots of different martial approaches from various different regions. So it didn't arrive out of his mind, it would have arrived out of experience within the real world and cross-fertilization of ideas and practices. Now, in that light, this martial practice is very much based again on the Chinese philosophy. So one of these things is, for example, the principle of not doing, which comes from Taoism, for example. And not doing is around being as efficient and doing as little as possible to affect a movement and complete a movement successfully. So this would apply also in the martial context. It's around efficiency. And so what one of the perspectives there of efficiency is that rather than the practitioner having to develop strength and then develop superhuman strength in order to be able to overcome any stronger opponent, the practitioner learns to sense and be aware of the strength and the movement and the structure of the opponent in order to be able to use that against them. So that means that you can actually be a small, slight practitioner against somebody who is very heavy and strong and actually learn how to overcome that with simplicity. So in those sorts of senses, Tai Chi is really this mixture of this whole body of knowledge that then leads to a way of being in the world. And the foundations of that are in whole body movement. And that really is the simplest and the most concise definition that you can come to with Tai Chi Chuan, is that it is about a systematized practice that develops whole body movement. And by that, I'm not just talking about the body. So again, in Chinese philosophy and in Chinese medicine, there is no separation between the mind and the body. So if you're developing the mind, you're developing the body. If you're developing the body, you're developing the mind. There is no distinction between the two. So the overall practice of Tai Chi does absolutely develop the mind, and it works on our emotions, it works on our senses, it works on all of those sorts of things in the same practice. So we don't need to do anything else in terms of the nourishment of any other parts of ourselves. So that is really what Tai Chi is just this whole body movement. And then when we get down to, well, what is it and what drives this whole body movement? And in Tai Chi, that is what we call the lower dantian. And that is based just below your navel in the center of your body. Now, sometimes that's referred to as our center of mass, but what you tend to find is over the years of building your practice and learning Tai Chi, all of the exercises and all of the principles construct something that then actually becomes experienced as if there is a ball within that area of the body. And so this ball rotates. So it can rotate sort of vertically, it can rotate horizontally, or more usually in the more complex movements, there's a mixture of all of those. So in whole body movement, we essentially have three movements. So that's a vertical rotation, a horizontal rotation, and a mixture of of those two, depending on the context and the scenario and the movement that's being done. Now, everything else follows. So the dantian is kind of the central construct that then drives that movement. So once that rotates, everything else follows. So the legs and the arms and the torso and so forth in a natural sequence of movement. So there you go. That is really kind of the, I don't know, the beginnings, opening the crack and opening the door to what Tai Chi is. And what I mean by that is that if you're a beginner and you've never done Tai Chi, this idea of the dantian is probably going to seem completely bonkers to you. And, you know, most of my beginner students have no idea what I'm talking about. And some of them really question this thing that is the dantian as if it were a mythical entity and doesn't really exist. And then a few years down the line, they kind of go, actually, now I'm really understanding what this thing is. So as a beginner, it may not make any sense to you. But the other side to this is that actually, in terms of what Tai Chi is, my journey, and I've only been doing Tai Chi for a little bit over 20 years now. I've been teaching for 9 years. So I'm just at the beginning of my journey too. And through those years, my meaning of Tai Chi changes. It goes through phases. So I will have experiences and phases where I really, really look at that, for example, the health aspect of Tai Chi, and simply looking at it as an exercise where I really delve into the complexities of the mechanics. And then I go through that phase, and suddenly then Tai Chi becomes this flow thing. So I'm really looking at the flow of Tai Chi, but the flow of, you know, energy through my body and the experiences that I'm getting consciously and so forth. And then I'll go through these periods where I really delve into the martial aspects and understanding and developing my knowledge and practice of the martial applications within Tai Chi. So the meaning of Tai Chi actually changes depending on your pathway and where you are in learning that process. And so that's why I don't really like to have this kind of set definition of Tai Chi, other than the whole body movement, rotation, and also that it is actually a lifelong journey. And part of the reason why this is a lifelong journey is that, again, in light of the philosophical underpinnings of Tai Chi, it is fundamentally about self-cultivation. It is about the development of the self through, in some ways, ritualized practice, because daily practice, weekly practice, monthly practice, the regularity of practice develops a type of ritual that helps to develop oneself. But there is also the elements of how one develops oneself and self-cultivates oneself to act appropriately within the world. And so that goes along the lines of being able to read situations that we're experiencing in the world more effectively and then act on them in a more fluid and natural kind of way. So, and that, because there are so many experiences we can have in life and the world is so complex, that cultivation is something that simply lasts an entire lifetime. So Tai Chi is fundamentally a self-development journey that actually lasts an absolute lifetime. So I'm hoping that that might give you some insight into, I think, the depth and the breadth, the complexities of Tai Chi, should you want to go down that route. Now, if you don't, that's absolutely fine, because you can actually simply go along to Tai Chi and use it as a physical exercise to feel better, to gain some strength, to develop your balance, to, you know, feel good, to do all of those sorts of things that come out of a physical exercise. But for me, I think that that is just the surface of Tai Chi. I think there is so much wonderful, rich stuff to explore within the art that is both about physical movement, it's about mental development. It is about cultivating our spirit, and by that I mean kind of our vitality, and begin to use it to engage in the world in a different way, which I have found myself to be hugely advantageous and really, really helpful in my life. So there you go. That, I'm hoping, is a reasonable introduction to what Tai Chi is. So I hope that was useful. I hope you enjoyed it, and you know, if you did, maybe I'll even see you at one of my classes, or you're welcome to check out my other videos on the form or other principles of Tai Chi Chuan. Thank you very much.